Okay, so what are we going to do next with this application? We want to insert something into a header that tells us that this application was built in our repo and also includes enough information about when it was built so that later somebody who runs it, let's say I'm running this as a service on my production cluster, and it starts crashing. I want to know which version is running in production, right? So we're going to stamp that information into the program. To do that, we want to generate some code. So this is also our opportunity to show you how Bazel can run code generation. We are not going to need to write any programs because there are very good programs already available on PyPy. In this case, what I want to find is a templating program. So I'm going to go here into my tools folder. And to start out with, I'm going to create something that's like a header that my application is going to print. And this is a template that I want Bazel to fill in for me, header.tmpl.text. And what header would look good in here? Something like, I am a cow, and I found this on the internet. And then we might want to have some build information up here, like built at timestamp. Okay. So I want this output. Here's my requirements, right? I want this output to show up here before the cow prints what it got from the internet. And I want it to show me when it was built. So how are we going to do that? Well, to get started, we need a templating engine that knows how to fill in this timestamp thing. It so happens I've heard of one called Jinja. My understanding is that the modern version of this is this thing, Jinja 2. And there's a CLI here. And the nice thing about CLIs is that Bazel can just run them. I don't need to write any custom Bazel stuff. I'm just going to grab this tool, run it with Bazel to do my templating. It's going to be really that simple. Okay, how do I do that? First step, obviously, I need to say that my project depends on the tool. So it's called pip install Jinja2 CLI. So I literally need to put that in my dependencies. Then I'm going to run those steps to update my pinned requirements so that Jinja2 and all of its dependencies are available to the build system. And for good measure, I will update the manifest file for generating build files. And now there's a little bit of an extra step. I'm going to have to go back to this README and go to the next section. We didn't look at this last time. It says to create a runnable binary for a console script from a third-party package, right? In Python, when something is runnable this way, it's called a console script. So this package exposes one of those. In this case, I'm going to use this bulldozer tool. It's already built into this repo to stamp out a little bit of stuff that Bazel needs to see. So I run that, and it fixed up my file in this tools folder where all of my tools live. So now it didn't know the name. I didn't tell it yet. So I need to know the script name, and I need the package name. And the package name is supposed to be in snake case, right? So if I was to take Jinja2 CLI, so that belongs here, but I need to transform it to snake case because of Bazel. And then the script name, so that's whatever it says is the script that it exposes. So I can copy that here from this package. That's the script name. Now I should be able to already run it. Tools, Jinja2. Okay, instantly working. I get the same output here that they showed me on the website about how to use it. So my next step is I want Bazel to call this tool for me. I want to have it do that when I ask it for a certain output file, and it's going to transform that header.tmpl.text that we made. So this is where we need to go shopping. And I recommend starting from Aspect's documentation site. We've tried to mirror a lot of the useful Bazel stuff here. What I need to do is take this binary and run it. So if I search for run binary, I find a few answers. One is from Bazel Skylib. That's maintained by Googlers, and it's kind of out of date all the time. Bazel lib comes from Aspect. We spend a lot of effort to make this one really good. In particular, it supports better makevar expansions, and we're going to need that in this demo, so I'm definitely going to pick this one. Okay, so I can just press this copy button to grab this thing and stick it in my build file. Great. Tool is Jinja2. Name is something like fill the template. And now I need a few more things in here. One of them I need is to tell Bazel the inputs, and then I need to tell Bazel the outputs. Everything Bazel does is based on transforming some inputs into some outputs using a tool. That's all we're going to do here. So the sources is header tmpl txt. That's a file in this package, right? It's right next to the build file. Outs. So what's this going to generate? It's going to generate header txt. And then finally, I'm going to have to give it some arguments, and we'll figure out what those are from what shows up down here. So let's read through them. Version, help, format, input variables. We are going to need an input variable to fill in the timestamp. So I'll take that one. And for format, I'm going to choose JSON because it's really easy to generate JSON and work with it. Okay, next, extensions. I don't need those. Define the template, I don't need that. Section, strict, out. Okay, out file, definitely want that. And in Bazel, it's always my job to tell the tool where to write the output, and I need to make it the same place Bazel expects to find that output. Most of the problems people have with wiring this sort of thing up is just that those two locations don't match. The secret to getting that to work is something called make variable expansion. So it looks like this $parens thing. If you haven't used make, then of course, new syntax is always annoying. It's not too bad. So what we can use here is a few operators. One of them is called execPath. And execPath is just going to point to the place Bazel thinks that this file belongs. And so that's the execPath of where we want the output to go, which I'm just going to copy from here, header txt. Okay, so those are my options. And then the tool says I should then give it an input template. So that's going to be, again, I'll use execPath to locate the template, and that's this one. So copy this into here. Notice every time you use one of these make variable expansions, whatever I put inside of here needs to match something that's on one of these other attributes. Bazel's expecting to line those two things up. Okay, great. So now I should be ready to do this. And now this time, instead of doing run, I'm asking it to produce this header txt file. So I'm going to do build. This is tools. And I can refer to this. I could also just tell it to build this header file. For here, I'm going to say fill template. So I'm going to point to this target. So it worked. So let me say, and show me the result. Because I'm doing development here, I want to have a nice, quick up, enter kind of loop. Built at nothing. I am a cow, and I found this on the internet. So this is not quite what we wanted. This built at is missing the variable, right? Okay, so now we need to learn about input data. So that's another argument that we pass. So again, we're going to need to do two things here. We're going to need to point to some input data. Then we're going to have to add the argument. But let's first generate the data. So I could make a JSON file in the source tree, but I'm not going to do that here because it's much easier to run a tool in Bazel to do that sort of thing. In this case, if you've ever used JQ, if you haven't used it, you should look it up. Incredibly powerful tool for manipulating JSON. Typically you would have JSON input and it would manipulate it and produce a slightly different JSON output. In our case, we don't have any input, so this first example is just right. I just wanted to generate me a new JSON document with an empty list of sources. Again, Aspect's documentation site is our friend. Just to make this read in order, I'm going to put that above the run binary. And here I need timestamp. This unfortunately copied with some syntax that won't work. Notice that just like Python, these files are written in a Pythonish kind of language called Starlark. So triple quotes will work here. Trying my build again. I did not get a result. Let's see. What did I do wrong? Of course. I did not finish wiring this up. I'm building the wrong target. So if I build, and let's, instead of no sources, let's call this data. So if I build tools data, and then print the result, cool. I got timestamp : 0. That'll work for the moment. So now I want to have that show up in this output. So I need to, again, tell Bazel that that's an input. So I'm going to put it here in sources, data.json, right? I can see that's the name of the file down here. And then it's the last argument to the tool, according to that CLI help that we were reading. I'll use exec path once again. Now when I build the template, the 0 shows up. Now, it's important to understand, why do I choose 0 here? Well, most of the time when I'm doing development, I want to have really high cache hit rates from Bazel. I want to make sure that I don't need to redo work. Bazel is meant to be incremental, so if I'm running on CI, even for a giant repo, it should not need to rebuild things unless they've changed. Now, of course, if I put the real timestamp here, it will have changed, and so that will cause a lot of rebuilding to happen. So the way this works in Bazel is there's an argument called stamp, and if I were to say -- stamp here, that means, yeah, I actually am okay with having my output be non-deterministic. In other words, it contains version control data. I might get cache misses, but I'm going to run with -- stamp only when I'm pushing my application to production or when I'm doing continuous delivery. And if I run it with that right now, of course, I still see 0 because I didn't say what I want to fill the stamp in with. So our next step is to scroll down a little bit more in this documentation. Some rules in Bazel know how to be stamp aware, and JQ is one of them. So with -- stamp, it can replace properties with version control info. I'll paste this from the example. It's a little long, but I'll explain it briefly. To replace our filter, and of course we want this to be timestamp as the output. So this is two things. First, it goes and finds the file that Bazel writes all these stamp variables into. And then second, if I have that file, I can grab one of the tags from it. Build embed label is one of them. In this case, I'm just going to use build timestamp because that's always present. But if it's not available, in other words, if this build is not stamped, I want it to print unstamped. And of course, the fact that the syntax highlighting here is hinting to me that the quotes were not copied correctly again. So there we go. So now if I do this with build -- stamp, I get built at a certain timestamp. But just to check my work, if I go back and build it without -- stamp, I get unstamped in brackets. This is the constant value so that I'm certain to get a cache hit. Cool. All right. So in the next video, I will show you how we're going to wire this result back up into the application so that the cow will say it.